Thanks, Bhavya.
Also, I think people have just started joining in.
Streaming.
We'll give it a couple of minutes before.
Yep.
The number of questions, Ankita, that we've had from the community for this chat is insane. Like, it's been what, 2 years to me
know.
running Talent Deck. I mean, sure, like a year and a half to me running Talent Deck, and this is the first time our Slido link is full. Like Slido went crazy for us. I'm like, guys, I don't think we can take all of these. We need to start bucketing these questions. Very unlikely that we'll be able to take all of these.
Yeah,
But
no, I think the topic itself is so it's so vast, it's so complex. It
yeah,
is it's under discussed, and but it's also equally very important. So I think it's awesome that people are asking these questions, and listen,
100%.
if we need another session to do this, to address more questions, follow up questions, if something was not covered, very happy to do that as
Ankita,
well.
you
Yeah.
know I'm gonna trouble you, right? Like, come on. I've been doing this with you for
And
the last, I don't know how long
it's
now.
no trouble. It's no trouble. It is my pleasure. It's
Awesome.
my pleasure.
We like I know it's dot 3:30, but you already have a bunch of folk. That's very cool. But we still give it a few
Yeah,
minutes
I
before we
think yeah
start.
we can give it a few minutes. I think it's
Folks in the
always
chat, so our script is in a way that we're trying to cover it from various use cases, etc. But if you can drop in a quick message on which company you're joining from, it just helps me curate this entire script that my team has given me a little better. I am assuming the chat should be open, but yeah, feel free to. Yeah, we have Outplay, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more which people will keep thinking. Wow, Ankita, we are literally 1 minute into a webinar, and this is the highest attendance that we have seen in the first minute. Now, I would like to believe that it is the two of us combined and just not you, but I'm still going to give you all the credit because I do this for a while now.
no, it's awesome. I think it's awesome that there are people who are coming in and showing so much enthusiasm and interest on this topic, and it's obviously it's a very important topic to discuss. I think Sufi, what would be the profile of the attendance today? To predominantly folks
100%.
in the HR teams, or
Yeah. So we actually have like before the chat, what we did was we did a profiling session to
right?
make sure we cover everyone. Broad, we have three categories. We so let me go in the order where we have a lot of HR people, heads slash talent leaders joining in. That is about 35-40% of the large group.
Okay.
A large, I think an equal percentage is about 45-50% is again people who are just in the mid section, right? Like these are people looks like, right? So the mid management is about 30, 45, 30, 35%. The rest 25% is interestingly a mix of young founders, given the two of us work with enough VCs by now. We have
Right.
a bunch of young founders and venture capitalist analysts who are just joining in to know more about ESOPs. And
Awesome.
we obviously have people from the community as well.
Awesome, man. We're very excited to talk about a topic that's obviously very close to my heart. It's an area also in which we are building in, and therefore I think have a fair bit of understanding about the topic area. Very excited to engage with people, help in whatever way we can. And yeah, and thanks so much to you and Talent Tech for having me today. I love it.
Thank you so much, Ankita. Okay, in the interest of time, why don't we quickly start? I'm sure people will keep joining in, but I think we've already reached triple digits. So we're good to 3 minutes. Triple digits is a self record. I'm going to write this out. But yeah, let's start. For everyone who's meeting Ankita for the first time, let me actually wrap my head around how do I start an introduction. I've known Ankita for a while now, but Ankita is the founder at Infinyte Club. Prior to Infinyte, she was heading revenue for Unacademy, one of the very first few leaders at Unacademy who has seen the massive growth that all of us know about today. Prior to Unacademy, she was the CEO at Coupon. She was at Zivame. She's had multiple stints across India and UK. Ankita, I think I can go on, but I am super excited to just be sharing the screen with you. I know we've met a bunch of times, but there are so many things that I have in my head right now to, cover. Share the screen with you. If you can give 2 lines of intro on how did you transition from being the CEO at a stage where internet was the king, to when edtech was in the boom, and now you're a founder and in a sort of segment that not a lot of people have heard about yet. But yeah, over to you.
Got it. Thank you, Sophia. That was a wonderful introduction. I think if I had to just add something to it, and to answer your last question, why this arc, right? So I actually started my career off as a banker. My formal education and training is in economics and finance. So I got started as a banker. I worked in England with Deutsche Bank for a few years, and I moved to India again, working financial services. But what I found was that I found financial services fairly, and this was 2008, 9. So this is when we were at the peak of the global financial crisis. So I personally found, if I may say so, I found financial services boring at that time, and I found that my growth was very, very linear. And just at that point, it was the tech startup ecosystem in India was taking shoot, and I said, you know what? I know nothing about this. Looks interesting. Let's jump into it. And then kind of, I was early to the Indian tech scene. And then, held multiple roles in area of interest that I had. But I think life always throws you a full circle and brings you back to, what you got started off with. So I'm back here to make people wealthy. I think finance and wealth is something that really excites me. So I said, okay, now that I'm ready to get back onto or build or become a founder, let me build in the space that I got started off in my career with, and which is, really understanding wealth. And then I think the next question comes, and then why are you building around? I think so. So fundamentally, at Infinyte, we believe that the next generation wealthy, people who are going to be the wealthiest individuals 10 years from now, are working in the tech startup ecosystem, are working in
100%.
companies like yours, like Topline, and like multiple of these companies that I'm seeing in the chat. And those folks today have ESOPs, right? And so ESOP is a marker of next generation wealth, right? So we
Hmm.
said that let's get started off by solving for people who hold ESOPs today. And that's the thesis of Infinyte Club. I think our long-term vision is to become the money manager for the next generation wealthy. The next generation wealthy today have ESOPs. We want to build solutions around ESOPs and then eventually bolt on more and more asset classes to help people who have ESOPs, because their needs and their requirements are fundamentally different from people who are traditionally, who had traditional trajectories in their career. So it'll be years, if I may say so, or decades before traditional banks and financial services institutions will even begin to understand the reality and the needs of people who hold ESOPs today. So I think that's the vision mission. That's, I think, somewhat probably will explain my arc a little bit. But yeah, happy to help people grasp the vast topic and understand ESOPs a lot better. Um, over let's jump into it.
Okay, awesome. Yes, Neil, and there's a conversation that I keep having with a bunch of people, right? I think every decade you have this one bubble which sort of doesn't burst, but which keeps moving from one thing to another, right? Like wealth creation for the last decade was property, right? Like real estate in general, was financial markets.
Mhm.
But like you said, right? I believe to the core that the next 10 years of wealth creation, like. I don't think the world is far where someone might come back and say that, hey, my grandfather had ESOPs of Flipkart at the time. He sold it for whatever, like a few millions, but now it could have been like triple digit millions. So completely resonate with that. But also, now that we have your introduction, I'll just quickly say hi to everyone so that people know who I am, and where am I coming from. My name is Sufyan. And I am one of the founders at Talent Deck. Talent Deck is India's largest people success ecosystem. This is our small effort to bring the most exclusive and the most strongest people success leaders and build India's largest people success community. But now, with all introductions out of the way, let's get started. So, Ankita, right at the questions, right? Look, I'm a noob when it comes to ESOPs. I am here to learn. I have a pen and paper with me, which I'm going to, take notes from. Explain me like a 5-year-old what ESOPs mean, because for me, ESOPs is paper money. I can't see it. I just have a doc that the offer letter says that I'm granted ESOPs, I have no idea because it's not money to me, right? Like end of the day, it's just something that's lying in my inbox. So explain me like a 5-year-old on what ESOPs is.
Got it. Happy to do that. I think before I kind of answer that question, I want to ask the audience this question, and with a show of hands or even with the chat, I think if anybody can tell me who knows, so anyone, do any of you know someone who became wealthy because they earned a salary?
Oh, okay.
Because they
Too
earned
soon.
a salary. Shweta, I see Shweta raising a hand. So Shweta, do you know
I
someone who
can I
became
can
wealthy
actually
because of
unmute.
a salary?
Okay, I am trying to figure out how
I
do I.
changed it. She's saying I changed it. Okay, exactly.
Okay.
So, so I think that points to the point that I was trying to make, right? That absolutely nobody in the world, no one in the world truly ever becomes wealthy. Wealthy, as someone has said, I saying define wealthy. Define wealthy is that you have the freedom to do whatever F you want to do, right? That's what wealthy is, right? You don't have to go to work the next day. You have all your needs, luxuries, etc., all taken care of. Right? The wealthy is different for different people, but the idea, I think, truly being wealthy is having the freedom of choice. That is being truly wealthy, right? Nobody became truly wealthy in the world because of salary. The only way to truly make wealth and become wealthy is to have ownership in companies. Ownership of businesses is what will enable you to become wealthy. If you're earning a salary, you're only earning a salary when you are physically putting in effort yourself. But if you are able to put your money to work, and you do that via investing in companies or owning parts of businesses, because a business is constantly working, that is when you will give yourself a shot at making wealth. So when you're investing in, let's say, public markets, you're investing in equities, as they say, you are owning parts of businesses. ESOPs also is is a way to own a part of a business, which is not yet sort of, in our context, we're going to probably be talking about companies that are not yet listed or are still early stage, probably not IPO'd yet. But an ESOPs is a way for employees to own a part of the business. Now, coming to the specific question. So I think the point that I'm trying to make is that ownership in a business, is truly important for anybody to truly create wealth. Okay, that is a given, that's a maxim, that is a undisputable truth. Okay. ESOPs, it stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. You can have ESOPs, you can Employee Stock Ownership Scheme. All of them, mean the same thing. ESOPs are granted by law only to employees, can be granted by law only to employees of a company. They are regulated, so that means it's a recognized instrument by the Companies Act. And when you adopt an ESOP policy, you have to submit it to the MCA, which is the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and you have to always maintain ESOP register, which means you have to maintain in your books, and as well as from a compliance perspective, who is being granted what. So I think so ESOPs is a recognized instrument. It is a way for a company to align the long-term incentive of a team member or an employee to that of the company. So
Ankita,
an
so
ESOP,
maybe I
yeah,
can probably have a follow-up question to that, right?
yeah.
And given I know I have people coming in who probably are in their first job or in their second job and who have been granted ESOPs. So there's this dilemma that keeps going around. People don't talk about ESOPs a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, unfortunately, it is just a document that is being shared with your offer letter.
Yeah.
But could you tell me a little on how do compliances look like, right? Like, because look, if you're a listed company, there is an NSE, there is a BSE, right? Like, there's a governing body. But for employee stock options, what is the governing body? How closely are investors involved to make sure that, hey, your ESOP schemes are correct? Because right now we've not seen a lot of, again, right, like the number of people that know about ESOP wealth creation is still a handful. Because as history says, right, like not a lot of companies have seen that exit yet, but that is not the case. The next 10 years are going to be game changing. So who
Right.
owns compliance of ESOPs, right? Like is it the founders? Like who can someone reach out to make sure that the ESOP policy or the compliance is set right?
Right. So I think your question is slightly more complicated question. I think there are a lot more to answer prior to saying what So, but in a nutshell, I will address your question. So the Companies Act, there is something called and well, while we're speaking, I'm going to speak in the Indian context because that's what is simple to understand. But in every so let's say there may be people over here whose companies are registered in Singapore or registered in the US. They will also have similar structures. It might not be the exact same sort of governing bodies, but it'll be similar, right? So at least in Indian context, the ESOP, the way the guardrails around which ESOPs have to be issued are part of Companies Act, right? So when you're adopting an ESOP policy, while there are certain guardrails that have been set forth in the Companies Act, allow according to which you can set up your ESOP policy, right? Once your ESOP policy is set up, it gets adopted, but you have to adopt it. That means you have to submit to the MCA, which is a Ministry of Corporate Affairs, that this is the policy that we wish to adopt, and it is basis these guardrails that we will run our
Follow.
policy. That policy document must be shared with people who, with our employees with whom you are sharing or to whom you are granting ESOP. So if anybody is not granting a scheme policy, that's not fair. That's something that's a red
Correct.
flag. That should be a red flag to you. And
Correct.
so from
Ankita,
this,
just
yeah.
on this topic, like, before I forget, so I have seen companies grant, and obviously, right, like companies keep evolving. So are ESOP policies subjected to change? Like, when probably you joined someone, you got an ESOP policy which you have, and over a course of time, uh, like, can the company change it?
Yes, it is possible to change an ESOP policy, and because every stage of company might require different sort of stages of might have different needs of the company. So yes, but so long as you are intimating the team members and that's okay. You can change the
Got
policy,
it.
but it's like, think about it like this, right? Like uh, if you're as a company, any policy you set, if you want to evolve the policy, you can do it, but you have to intimate folks who have signed up to a previous policy. This is the change that is coming, and you have to get their sign off on that as well.
Got it. Got it. Fair. Like I see, right? Like we have a bunch of people from companies ranging from seed till
Mm.
unicorns of the ecosystem. But what is the right way to think about ESOPs, or rather, how early can a company actually build an ESOP plan, right? Like, or when does a company become eligible to create an ESOP plan? Like, is there a framework around that, or is there a way
Got it.
that companies think?
I'm going to flip the question and I'm going to reframe
Sure.
that in a different way, right? I think, what is the purpose of ESOPs? Okay, like I think from a company's perspective, why should a company have it? The purpose of ESOPs is, so when a company is setting up an ESOP policy, it is signaling an intent to people that I want to share ownership in the company. Why do I want to share ownership in the company? Because I am signaling that I want the best talent. I don't want just people to work for me. I want people to come in with an ownership mindset. People that have an ownership mindset, I want to bring that kind of talent into the company. And I want to share not just I want to not just pay them, but I also want them to become owners in the company should they continue to work for the company for a long period of time. So to answer your question, that when should a company do it, I think there is the earlier the company does it, the better. In our context, because we're probably talking to companies that are VC funded, most VCs, before they come in, let's say even if they're writing a seed check, or before they come in, they will mandate the creation of an ESOP pool. And
Okay.
we'll say that, and many companies, like so most of the top tier VCs will mandate a minimum of a 10% ESOP pool to be created before they come in. So it comes from the founder's equity and is not dilutive to other subsequent investors. So most of
Okay.
them will mandate that you have an ESOP pool created prior, and then I think they give you, I think, a time up to 6 months to a year to adopt an actual ESOP policy, and thereby start sharing. So the answer is, it can be done at any point. There's no such rule or law. The question is, I think from as an employee or somebody joining a company, what it should signal to you if an ESOP pool is created is that that company is serious about sharing ownership with me, right? So
Got it.
if you flip the question, asking when should a founder do it, as early as possible. As early as possible means you are signaling to future investors also that this founder has a generosity mindset. This founder wants to attract the best talent, and is comfortable sharing that ownership with people who perform well.
Correct.
So
Correct.
I think the answer does the founding team have a scarcity mindset or a sharing mindset, right? And
Fair.
as early as you do it, the better it is.
Fair. Interesting, right? So I think over the last 5 minutes, we've understood what ESOP is, right? Like you call it employee stock options, employee stock schemes, but ESOPs are essentially you giving a part of the company to someone who's sort of joining in.
Right.
We have also understood when can companies think about ESOPs. The answer is the day you integrate. Ankita, before we sort of move forward, right? Like a very tangential question, which I'm again sort of very curious about, is the fact that I'm sure in the participants, while we will obviously have a bunch of people who will look to start up in a similar ecosystem. But what if you go the other route? What if you actually go the brick and mortar route of starting a conventional business and I have an LLP set up, right? Given, I'll just paint an example, right? Today, Sufyan is stepping out and starting a, a business which is a registered LLP. And it could be a very conventional business, right? Like, I don't know, I'm maybe starting a chain of distributions. Uh, so can an LLP or a traditional business also has the power to look at ESOPs or employee stock options, etc.? Because I have never heard my fathers or the generation before talk about ESOPs. It was only listed companies, right? So does ESOP also hold true for traditional businesses?
Right. No, so LLP, uh, so there is no, so LLP by definition is a limited liability partnership where there is a partnership deed that governs what the company will do, how it will behave, and how the profits will be shared. There is no concept of stock or ESOPs in a traditional
Interesting.
sense in an LLP. It's only in a private or a company setup. Okay, so there are three types of
Got
body
it.
corporates that are possible: a company, LLP, and a sole proprietorship, right? These are the broad three types of body corporates that can exist. An ESOP, in a technical definition, can only exist in the company concept. But if your question is on LLPs, if you had to share ownership, you'll have to make somebody a smaller partner in the firm.
Got
Right.
it.
I think that would be the analogy there. But I think for the purpose of this discussion, I think we should stick to companies.
Fair. No, fair. Somehow this question came up a bunch of times when you're running posters
Right.
like
No,
and I'm going to sort of bring this up.
I think the question still holds that what happens if they are not traditional. Um, I think let's just go one step back. Let me explain how ESOP ka life cycle works, and then we can address what happens in, let's say, a more traditional, not non VC funded business. How does it work, and how are you likely to go from getting an ESOP granted to you or going and getting liquidity, right? Um, so an ESOP is granted to you. In order to be granted an ESOP, you have to be an employee of the company. Okay, ESOPs can only be
Sure.
granted to employees. Once an ESOP is granted to you, there are a few terminologies that the person who is getting the ESOPs needs to be aware. One is, of course, you'll get a certain value of ESOPs, right?
Sure.
Always, when you're accepting a ESOP grant, always ask what is the value of this. Don't ever accept units. If somebody tells you, I'm giving you 100 units of ESOPs, I'd be like, okay, great, but what's the value? I mean, if somebody is not telling you the value of the ESOPs and they are not being truthful with you, one ESOP could be worth 1 rupee. So you give me 100 rupees? No,
Sure.
that doesn't make sense. But if one ESOP is worth a lakh of rupees and you give me 100 ESOPs, then yes, of course, it's worth a crore. It makes sense. So always ESOPs should be evaluated when it's granted to you in the value, in the dollar value that you're being given. An
Okay.
ESOP will have a vesting schedule. Now, what does a vesting
Okay.
schedule mean? A vesting schedule. So ESOP, think of ESOP is employee stock option. Okay, it's an option. It's not equity yet. It's one stage before equity. Holding an option gives you the right to buy equity or stock in the company at a predetermined rate, which is your exercise price, at a future date. So when you're granted an option, you just have an option. So think of it like a seed almost, right? You
Okay.
can't do much with a seed. All you can do is plant the seed, and you have to wait for the seed to grow into a plant. And it takes
Sure.
time before the plant sprouts a fruit. If I can give an analogy,
Sure.
right? So think of an ESOP as a seed granted to you, which you just have to put it in the ground and wait. Now, the time for that seed to grow into a fruit is what it's called a vesting schedule. Clear?
Okay.
So every option will have a vesting schedule. Typically, vesting schedule are usually 4 years, and most companies that adopt fair ESOP policies have an equal vesting of 25% every year.
Each
We
year.
have seen vesting schedule also be 10, 20, 30, 40. That means
30, 40.
10% in year 10% in year one, 10, 20 in year two, 30 in year three, and so on and so forth. Or we have seen 20, 20, 30, 30. We've seen multiple permutation combinations, but the fairest one is 25% equally every year. Bear in mind that the vesting, as per Indian law, the cliff period is that period in which nothing vests, is 1 year by law. So if you join a company, it will be at least 1 year before you vest anything. So technically, you can also be granted an option and have everything vest after 1 year. You can have that also. You can have 100% vest after 1 year, but 1 year is the minimum amount of cool-off period, if I may say so, that you cannot vest anything. So, for example, at most of the company that we advise, and is we have a 1 year cliff, but post 1 year, it's a monthly vesting. So you can have multiple permutation combinations, but you can't have monthly vesting in year one itself. Does that make sense? Does everybody understand what a cliff period means? A cliff is the period in which you will not vest anything, and post that you start vesting at any any pace that you would like. So that's what a vesting period is. So let's say, like, you're granted, like we talked about an option. Let's say if you're granted a 1 crore worth of a grant, and it's a 4-year vesting with 25% equally and 1 year cliff. In year one, you'll vest 25 lakh, year two 50 lakh, year three 75, and year four a crore. Now, let's say let's say what happens if you leave the organization in 2 years, right? And you have vested 2 lots, you will walk away with 50 lakh vested. The unvested part of your grant lapses, right? So what I was saying is, to think about in our plant analogy, if you planted the seed, the plant has grown and there were 4 fruits to be taken. Only 2 have sprouted, so you've taken those 2 fruit. The second 2 fruit that were to come have not yet come, and they are gone forever. That plant is no longer accessible to you. Right? So that's what vesting means. So whatever is vested is yours. Whatever is unvested is not yours. It lapses. Now, again, vested still means you have just got the fruit in your hand. It is not ready for yours to eat yet. Right? Now, in order for you to have, once your ESOPs are in vested state, they can be exercised. So once you exercise your shares, or you're exercising your right to convert your options to shares, only when you own shares is when you actually own some stock in the company, or you have ownership in the company. I hope I am being clear over here. If anybody is Bhavya, if you can keep an eye on the questions on the chat, please flag up something that needs to that I need to address, right? So I think that's what so once the options become vested, you can exercise your right to convert those options to shares. Now, what do you need to do to exercise? You need to pay the company the exercise price or the strike price. It's both interchangeably used. Same thing. It means the same thing. Your exercise price could be face value or nominal, and your policy will tell you that. Your policy will tell you if the company is allowing you to buy shares at what price. It could be anything as low as face value of the stock, which could be 1 rupee, 10 rupees, whatever. Or it could be a discount to last round. Right? So let's say, let's say when you were granted the option, the price of the share of the company was 1 lakh. Some companies say that, okay, we're offering you a 10% discount to exercise. In that case, you would have to pay 90,000 rupees to buy a share of, or to have the right to buy the share of 1 lakh rupees. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that is what a strike price is. Yes.
No, just so that we understand, right? Like, and I'll reemphasize, because this is a point that people kept asking every single time to ask you, is exercise price for the entire, in this exact same example, is you cannot incentivize from ESOPs. You can only, cash out shares. The transition that happens from employee stock options to shares, and the amount that you paid sort of to make that transition is what the strike price looks like, right?
So,
And
so
that could
strike price
vary.
is very important to look at, right? Like if a company is giving you the option to buy the stock at a nominal value, yes, there is immense value in that. But if you're getting only a minor discount to last share price, then you're not getting much value. You're not, there is, the company is not leaving money on the table for you. Does that make sense? So the strike price actually
Sure.
is something very, very crucial to note about about when you are signing up a grant letter, or so let's say in my 1 crore example, let's say you're joining a company and they're giving you 1 crore of stock options, but if you have to pay 90 lakh
90
rupees
lakhs
to
for it.
buy 1 crore worth of shares, that means you're actually, the value you're getting is only 10 lakh.
10 lakhs.
Then but if my strike price, let's say for those 100 shares, was 10 rupees, I'd have to pay 1,000 rupees to buy stock worth a crore.
Worth a crore. Yeah.
Right.
That is
At this
what
point,
it really
taxes
looks like.
also kick in, but we can choose to leave taxes out of the conversation for today, because that in itself is another
It's a larger, yeah.
what you call rabbit hole, right? So once now that you own stock in the company is when you are a shareholder in the company. So granted, so this is life cycle looks like granted, vested, exercise, ownership. That's the life cycle.
Ankita, so between this, right, like between the time you have plucked the fruit, which means you have something that is vested, and the time you can exercise it. So there's something called exercise period which is played around.
That's
Now,
right.
companies say that, hey, you need to exercise this in a year. Companies say that, you can keep this, you have indefinite exercise period. Could you spend a little time there? That is
Yeah.
again a term that is used like very loosely.
That's
And
a
not
great question,
a lot of
Sufi.
people
It's a
understand.
great question. It's a very important question. This is one of the things. So, like most people, when they're joining a company, they pay attention to vesting period. They pay attention to this, to the amount granted. What they forget to notice is what we just talked about, strike price and the post exit exercise window. This is very, very important. Okay, the post exit exercise window is the time period in which, once you've gotten the fruit in your hand, uh, it is the time period before the fruit goes stale, right?
Yeah.
And you can't, or rots, you can't eat it anymore. So many companies have, and obviously the shorter the exercise post exit exercise window, the worse it is. So some companies we've seen have it at 90 days, which is terrible.
Yeah.
I believe by law in India, it is 10 years, that the maximum. But also the law gives a little bit of a room that 10 years maximum, but extendable upon management discretion.
Correct.
So you can, so I think, obviously, if in any company that is intending to have an infinite exercise window is obviously a company that is serious about sharing wealth. Now, why is this exercise window important? Let me explain. And therefore, a natural, I know we said we won't touch taxes, but I can't not touch taxes. Folks, one thing in life I think we all have to internalize is that two things in life are inevitable: death and taxes. Can't avoid either. It has to happen in your lifetime. Okay. But we won't talk about something as sordid as death. We'll talk about taxes instead. Boring, but true. So, so the natural question that people would be asking, right, is so okay, I've vested it, so why don't I exercise it, right? Why shouldn't someone exercise it? The answer is, in the ideal world, yes, you should exercise as fast, but the problem is that at the time of exercise, guess who comes knocking at the door? The tax man, right? So unfortunately, and this is the world over, uh, taxes are due to the government at the time of exercise. So if there isn't liquidity back to back available, most people choose not to exercise. Why do I say that? So let's say in a 1 crore example, right? If let's say I vested everything and I say, okay, I want to exercise, everything, and assuming my strike price was 10 rupees a share, I had 100 shares, 1,000 rupees, easy enough. So here's $1,000, give me 1 crore worth of shares. It's not at that easy though. The tax man will come and say that you have received 1 crore minus 1,000, which is 99 lakh 999,000 rupees worth of free value. Where's my share? Right? So what happens is that difference between the strike price that you paid the company and the share price at that time is what you will pay to the government as taxes, and it will be taxed at your income tax slab. So this is called perquisite tax. The highest tax slab is about 40% with the surcharges, etc. But it will depend on the tax slab that you're in. If you're on the lowest tax slab, you'll pay 10%, whatever, 15%. It depends on your tax slab. So now let's say in this 1 crore example, and assuming that I would be on the highest tax slab, I would have to pay close to 40 lakhs to the government straight up just to exercise those shares. But now let's say that a company is fairly early stage. There is no liquidity available. I'm holding on to 1 crore worth of shares, but there's nobody to buy it. Or let's say even that 40 lakhs, right? Where do I produce that 40 lakhs from? Where do I front that money? I might not have that in savings. And even if I have that in savings, I might not be, and we work in early stage companies.
To do that. Yeah.
I might not be in a position to pay off that money, right? And even that, let's say, like if the company is still sort of not, at a very, very mature or an evolved stage, and there is still a significant failure risk in that company, I may not want to take that risk. I might not be in a position to take that risk. So in most cases, in most often than not, people do not exercise their shares unless there is liquidity available back to back. So if I have a buyer who's buying 1 crore worth of shares from me, I'll be like, great, okay, I might be temporarily okay to pay the government 40 lakhs right away, and then I'll, sell it onwards for 1 crore, and then I'm, happy at home, right? So now circling back to the question of why is a long exercise window important? A long exercise window is important because the longer you have more chances or opportunities for exits, which could be M&A, it could be a strategic sale, it could be an IPO. So the more time you have, the more chances that the ESOPs can become, or the options that you own can convert into liquid cash, really, and become wealth creation opportunities. I hope that clarifies for the audience.
I have a ton of questions that people are DMing me. Like I've lost track at this point, but clearly this is a very top of the mind topic for everyone. So Ankita, just to understand this right? Shares expire or ESOPs expire if you don't vest them.
Yes.
It is as simple as that, right? Like it comes in if your exercise period was about 90 days, the 91st day, if you have not exercised, is it right to say that it expired? Like whatever you own is terminated.
Expired, worthless, gone. Poof.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. So I think the last 15 minutes we have gone from understanding what ESOPs are till running back the circle and understanding the terminologies like vesting period, strike price, etc. Ankita, I have two sets of people on the call today, right? Now, the first set, which I'm honestly the most excited about, are HR people leaders who day in, day out look at this ESOP policy. And given you already work with a bunch of HR leaders, etc., could you probably pinpoint 2 or 3 things that as an HR leader, you should be very crystal clear about? And it could also be from experience, right? Like where, you have seen people not know much about it. Like strike price, vesting period are probably 1 or 2 things that one should know. But anything else that sort of strikes your mind?
I think what I will share is more insights that that we have realized while talking to people, right? I think one is that as HR and speaking to HR leaders, right? I think something that you should know. The more transparent a company is about their ESOP policy and how they plan to, what are the plans that the company has for liquidity, how does the company really think about sharing wealth, the better it is. ESOPs is such a complex topic, but it is, if used well, it is an extremely powerful weapon, if I can say so, to attract and retain the best talent, right? How did companies like Flipkart, Cred, you name it, like Razorpay, etc., all of these companies, why have they become unicorns? Because they become unicorns because the founders were unapologetic and are unabashed about saying that everyone who comes into my organization will be a shareholder in my company. And they were able to rally everybody with an ownership mindset and therefore work towards really like hitting it out of the park. So ESOPs, when used well, can be an extremely powerful weapon to attract the best quality talent. Otherwise, you'll always be competing against the next startup across the street that has raised a larger round and therefore can give a better comp, right? So the more transparently, clearly, and emphatically you can talk and share about your ESOP policy to prospective employees or employees, the better. Okay. The second thing that I would say is that ESOPs is about money. It's part of their compensation. Having conversations about compensation and money is extremely difficult. It makes people nervous. It makes people uncomfortable. So just because somebody is not coming to you and asking you questions, it is foolish to believe that those questions don't exist. Therefore, the more you communicate with your team members, the more information you have, the more engagement that you have around ESOPs, the more it is discussed, the more powerfully you will be able to use your ESOP policy, which would mean having information shared upfront, using ESOP management tools, which you can therefore via that they can read material, understand a little bit more, engage with their ESOPs a little bit more. The more transparency there is, the better, because there is that natural hesitation of people to not ask those questions upfront, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of friction in general around that topic.
There's a lot of friction. There is a lot of, so I think that would be my two most important call outs to HR leaders. That one, if used well, ESOPs can be an extremely powerful retention and hiring tool. And B, people they always have questions in their heart, which they're probably not coming up front and asking you. And therefore you have to proactively reach out, clarify people's doubt, and be almost disarming about it, and be able and give your team members the space and the opportunity to come and talk to you about it.
Awesome. Ankita, so, while we covered this, but just to sort of emphasize, right? Obviously, everyone in the audience at some point will be evaluating opportunities outside. So when as a prospect, or when you're looking at a future employer, what are things that you should probably look at from a employee stock policy perspective, right? I know we covered things like strike price, just to make sure for everyone who's probably joining late. Strike price is essentially the amount you pay to get the ESOP converted into a share, right? Obviously, you should look at what is the strike price. You should look at what the exercise period is. Anything else that is underlying the gray area that a lot of us are not aware about yet?
No, I think these are the few important pieces that
do you think ESOP pool also says a lot about the company? I know the two of us have had this conversation.
Yeah. So I was going to just come to that. I think see, there are a few things that the vocabulary that you pinpointed. Yes, these are important things to look at. I think what you want to, when you're reading the ESOP policy, is as a prospective employee into a company, you want to read between the lines to see what is this ESOP policy signaling to me. And the most important thing to understand whether an ESOP policy or ESOPs in a particular company will result into something, I'm going to be looking at the intent of the founders on sharing wealth, because founders and the management of the company are the biggest sort of decision makers or linchpins, if I may say so, in this equation. The intent of the founder will determine whether your ESOP policy or your ESOPs will ever result into something. What do I mean by that, right? When companies are private, the sources of liquidity available are usually very limited and guarded, right? ESOPs are all governed by ROFRs. If you read your ESOP policy, there'll be something called as an ROFR, which means that the company has the right of first refusal before you can sell it to anybody else, right? So what you want to look at is, like we said, how long is the exercise window? If the exercise window is really short, it tells me that this founder the founder or the management of this company is cheap, and they want to get back their ESOPs or their ownership as fast as they can. They don't want to give employees the opportunity to search for liquidity, these things. The size of the ESOP pool matters. If somebody is creating a 2% and a 3% ESOP pool, that tells me that they are only willing to share 2 and 3% of the company with the employees. It's very less. Standard, basic, bare minimum ESOP pool size should be 10% in today's context. Right? In today's context, that's the bare minimum. The more, the better. We've seen companies do as large as 20% ESOP pools, which tells us that, this company is serious about having an ownership mindset in the listing. They're serious about sharing wealth. right?
Yeah.
The other thing that I would look at is how is the company addressing liquidity requirements, right?
Okay.
How often does this company have a history of creating liquidity around ESOPs, right?
Hmm.
That may not always be possible, but if a company has done that, that's a huge green flag. Does the company's ESOP policy address when liquidity, will be possible? Do they have and while a founder can't in a policy write that, oh, I will give liquidity on so and so date, that's not possible, but you can't write that because it has other tax implications for the company. But when you're having verbal chats about joining a company, asking the founder or asking the team, what how does the company think about creating liquidity around ESOPs? It would be very interesting to hear, is their answer very standoffish, as or when we see, or our intent is that every time we raise a round we want to create liquidity, or we're partnering up with XYZ people to ensure that there is a constant stream of liquidity available. So I think these are some of the things that I would
Interesting.
try to gather intent more than anything else, right?
Got it. But again, right, like maybe it's a topic that we cover different day, but I feel liquidity in general is a very taboo topic to talk to in this ecosystem, at least from where we are, right? Like, I don't think a lot of people are okay sort of talking about this right away, but I think that's a topic for another day. My chat is flooded with questions. I think in the interest of time, I will probably let go of half of my script, and why don't we start questions? But before that, Ankita, we've covered a bunch of things, right? Like we've covered going from what an ESOP really meant till the jargons of it, the ESOP pool. What do you look at when you're sort of joining a company? What do you look at as an HR? The last one, which we'll sort of pause before we move to questions, is everyone knows that in the case of any liquidity, there is
Mhm.
acquisition, there is merger, and there is obviously you going IPO,
Mhm.
or you exiting. But about 2 minutes back, you also said that there are other institutions where companies have partnered with, etc. So could you actually share some light on, in over the past, how have companies actually created liquidity for ESOPs? How have people like the entire world knows the entire phone pay and Flipkart story, right? There's Bangalore got 700 million credited in one day. It's something that is written in the history, but not a lot of examples are there out. So could you actually spend some time just on liquidity?
Yeah, I think I will caveat this answer by saying that the Indian ecosystem is fairly young. Right? I think the tech startup ecosystem in India is probably 15 years old at best. So the liquidity options or the stories around liquidity are very few in India. If I'm being
Sure.
100% candid, obviously PhonePe, Flipkart this year 700 million fucking a, right? Sorry, pardon my language. But you can understand my excitement, right? The
Yeah,
year
yeah.
before that, right? The year before that, even though 2022 was a dismal year in terms of less funding available, there was still 220 million dollars odd of liquidity last year that had took place. The year before that, it was about 400 42 million of ESOP liquidity that took place, and this happened across 15 20 companies. But if we look to the west, right, if we look to the valley, for example, there are there is a very very large number of what we call solo capitalists. Solo
Yeah.
capitalists are individuals who are micro funds or micro VCs themselves, and they are investing their own capital. Most of these solo capitalists are former, not founders, former operators, right?
Yeah.
They all
Yeah.
worked at positions of leadership in either Google, Facebook, DoorDash, Stripe, PayPal, right? Uh, and there are and I can name probably 10, but there are probably a few thousand of those guys, right?
Yeah.
Um, there is a lot of that ecosystem there is fairly mature. So apart from the liquidity options that you mentioned, right, which is public and M&A and strategic corporate activity, um, there are many platforms available which will enable normal investors to also come in, and there are so pre-IPO there are banks that will fund to help exercise. There are private individuals who can buy into these companies, and there are companies that, such as Carta, Zen Equity, Zen, Forge Global, Nasdaq Private Markets, etc., where a lot of liquidity options are available to people even prior to IPO. But to answer your question, that I think for true liquidity to take place, we do need more companies to go public, because that is eventual liquidity, right? That is when the real floodgates of liquidity really opens up. Um,
Interesting.
so I think we've started to see the early signs, right? Like we've seen
Yeah.
Zomato, Nykaa, Policy Bazaar, Map My India. I might be missing a few, but you see what I'm saying, right? The
Yeah.
first Paytm, first sort of layer of our tech companies sort of IPOing, but yes, but there are, to answer your question, there in the US and in markets globally, there are opportunities available to employees to liquidate their ESOPs. We are building one such solution at Infinyte Club to be able to enable folks like us to participate in liquidity programs. Like, how cool would it be if, like, all of us in the room could buy, let's say, I don't know, what company do we love? I don't know, like Cred,
I know
Razorpay,
Razorpay. Yeah.
Razorpay, right? Like, would it be
With
awesome
the
that
new
all of us
WhatsApp
can go and buy?
news that's floating around.
Right. So wouldn't it be awesome if you could buy into some of those companies and thereby give the employees their liquidity? What if those liquid people who got liquidity then bought into other companies, in D2C, I don't know, whatever, fills, whatever you fancy, right? So I think so. Those are some of the options those will be the opportunities that will start coming as the Indian ecosystem matures further.
Fair. No, I think the beauty of this ecosystem is, like you said, right, so very off topic, but there's this entire lane in Mountain View and Menlo Park, which is just like there are houses of people who have done exits between the companies you mentioned, right? Like, and all of these are solopreneurs. Either they are LP, so this money keeps revolving in the ecosystem, and I think that's the beauty of it. But in the interest of time, I am going to open questions, given we have quite a few. I'm sure a bunch of
Bring
them
it on.
have been answered already, but I'm just going to go in the order. Before I do that, I can also see someone raising hand. I think Zishan, that's you. Zishan heads the team at CoinSwitch India. He's the head of people there. I am just allowing you to talk before
Hi,
I go ahead.
hi, Zishan.
Zishan.
Hey, hi, Ankita. Hi, Sufyan. Sorry, I think it was a mistake.
Oh, okay.
I'm really enjoying the conversation. Thanks so much,
Okay, high five
Ankita and
then to
Sufyan.
that.
Awesome.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay. So, Ankita, one question that came a bunch of times, right? A bunch of companies in the ecosystem today have contractor, consultants, advisors. And someone actually came back asking that, hey, we have seen this conversation around that advisors also get ESOPs or contractors also get ESOPs. So the first question, like you said, is Indian law does not allow it. But is there a possibility to do that, or you cannot do that, right? Like,
See, technically, ESOPs, okay, in a technical definition, are only to be granted to employees. That's clear as
okay,
night and day. Okay, there is no ambiguity there.
okay,
What you can do is advisory. You can structure anything under the sun, right? Structure, but bear in mind these are not governed under any law. So what people tend to do
okay,
is, we've seen PSOPs, like partner stock option plans, or like some companies have done TSOPs, or like or where they have, like, let's say, I think Urban Clap, oh sorry, Urban Company did for their gig workers, that they have like some kind of a thing. So technically, under the law, what happens is these are not recognized, right?
okay,
But the way they would structure it is, they would still create a pool and they would still grant it. But
okay,
there is and so we've seen, actually, in one case of one insurance company's IPO was blocked because they had followed a similar, strategy of giving their employees and partners instruments which are not recognized under companies or NCLT. This is not a
okay,
recognized instrument. So it's essentially,
okay,
what it is there is no what do you call it? There is no instrument underlying. It's a contract. It's
Got it.
essentially saying that you're giving someone, an external party, a contract, saying, and the contract says that what do you call it? That if you perform this duty, you do this, then I am liable to pay you this much. It's a contract.
Got it.
Now, the reason this works very well in the US is because contracts are highly enforceable in the US. That's not the case in our country. So let's say if you've got advisory stock options, but if the company, if you've got advisory stock, first of all, there's no such thing as advisory stock. It's a contract. Please bear that in mind. If the company chooses to go back on that word for there's not much you can do. You can take them to court, and God help you for the next 15 years till your case becomes heard, because you don't hold any instrument. Does that make sense?
Fair. No, this makes sense.
ESOP is an instrument, right? It's like equity is an instrument, a debt or a debenture is an instrument. You are holding no instrument when you're a.
Got it. So, if you're a contractor or an advisor, you have a contract that can be given to you.
Yes.
You can there's nothing called equity or an instrument which is in the form of employee stock options that are given to you.
Yeah. So what happens again? A contract can be drawn up in a way to say that if the company doesn't achieve its goals, then this becomes null and void or whatever. All of those things are possible. But what we saw SEBI do, and this is the only example that we have, one example of SEBI actually blocked an IPO of a very well-known insurance company and said that, you've given these random, SARs, etc., which are not recognized in the Indian. I'm talking strictly on the Indian context. You've given these, partner stock options and stuff like that. Clear it. I am seeing this as a liability in your books. So till you clear this, you will not be able to go public. Right. So it's something that you should know as a company, that it's not something that is favorably looked at by the regulator. It is also, but for a person accepting it, we understand it's a contract, and that the enforceability of a contract will be like that of a contract, and not of an instrument governed by NCLT.
Got it. Fair. This second question that someone asked was, hey, can you please help with the act that mentions cliff period for 1 year? Apparently, I think in the conversation you did mention that. So I'll just type it out, or I think Bhavya can sort of type it out. What's the act called?
I mean, Companies Act. It's all government, so you can just Google it.
Ankita, here's a very interesting question, right? So, at least in the Indian startup ecosystem, we have a lot of companies that are registered in Singapore.
Right.
And then you have an Indian entity which is sort of granting the ESOPs, etc. Right? So, is there something that one should be aware of, where are the units granted under the parent company, or the units are granted under the Indian entity? How should one sort of think about it?
Got it. So this is a slightly complex and technical question, which ideally a chartered accountant or a company secretary should answer. So I'm going to caveat my answer on this, and I will tell you what usually happens. If a company is incorporated in say a foreign jurisdiction, the company usually stock options are granted. I'm saying usually stock options are granted in the parent entity where the fundraising is happening. Because value creation is happening of that entity. So when investors are putting in money in the in that parent entity, that is where the investors are saying that this company is worth $1 billion, therefore I am giving this company a few $100 million. So value creation is happening in that level. So for you to be most secure, I think, and most companies do that as well, they will grant ESOPs at the parent level, or where the fundraising is happening, because the value is there. If you have a subsidiary, the value creation is not happening in the subsidiary, the value creation is happening in the parent entity. That said, there are situations where people could come up with mirroring structures, and this is slightly complicated, and you have to legally check this, and that where you could have you could be given equity in the subsidiary with a back-to-back call option, so something that derives value from the parent, and it's possible to do that. That is a lot more complicated, but a cleaner approach from an employee's perspective is if you holding stock options from the parent entity.
Got it. Fair. The other question that we had, which I think we've already covered, but I'll just sort of call it out, is can an organization grant multiple ESOP pools? Or rather, I think the question is, can you increase your ESOP pool with time? Is that a possibility?
Yes.
Like maybe you
Yes, you can
started
keep
with
increasing
5%,
them.
but you can. Got it.
Yes.
The other question was buyback, right? So someone wanted to understand how does buyback work? So like the question was, hey, buyback, is it for you to increase the ESOP pool back because you started with a 10% pool and maybe with time that is exhausted? Or buyback is for you to get more shares into the company because you're looking at fundraise. So how, like from an employee perspective, how does one look at buyback as and when it happens?
So I think the so there are other ways of increasing an ESOP. You can increase an ESOP pool. So it will come at the cost of, so okay. Uh, uh, Whoever is on a cap table at a given point in time, if more equity has to be created or more this thing, it comes at everyone's cost. So everyone will dilute equally for your ESOP pool to or further increase in equity. So that's
Okay.
so a buyback. I mean, so is the question that why does a company do a buyback?
Yeah.
Or
So the question is, like, what is that one should be aware of when there's a buyback happening, right? Like, is it important for us to know the reason of a buyback? Because the answer is that a company might not share.
you're getting cash, like you're getting cash, right? So I think why question a gift toss, right? Like I think the most important, the most okay, a buyback when it is happening, the most important reason is that there is for an employee's perspective is that I'm getting. Bear with me 1 second. Someone's
Sure.
phone is ringing.
Well, this happens. We'll wait for Ankita to come back. But yes, Ankita is here.
Sorry about that, folks.
No problem.
I think so. Yeah. So what I was saying was that when a buyback is happening, the most important thing is that your employees are getting cash in hand, right? When cash in hand is taking place, so there's nothing better than that. Now, what does it mean from a company standpoint? It means the company is doing, it is signaling that I am doing well and I'm sharing wealth. Everything, and it is parting with its own capital to pay out to this thing. I think the
Got
way
it.
to think about it is the analogy to make is dividends in public markets, right?
Hmm.
The company is giving you dividends, right? Like I think that's the analogy if I had to make one,
Fair.
right? So I don't think there are implications to what happens to the capital structure, how it is happening, and all of that. But those are, I feel, secondary implications to it. But I think the most important thing is that it's a positive thing to look at. It's a positive thing.
Got it. Got it. Fair. I think we are at time. Ankita, honestly, I'm sure if we continue, this can go on. I still have about 3 pages left of Slido questions with me, but
Right.
this was insanely fun and good, right? Like honestly, a lot of people came back saying, "Hey, ESOP is a very blah topic to talk," right? And then there's someone else who said, "Hey, because people don't know it's so blah," and I can see a lot of people here are specifically attending this to hear you out. This was super fun, Ankita. Thank you so much for taking the time. We will probably need to do a version 2 of this soon,
Yeah, I think
and we will again come back to you. But
I think Shweta is asking for a follow-up session. I'm very happy to do it, Shweta. And very, very happy to talk about this in detail. I think maybe we could have a stepped-up version, of it, and we could probably get a little more technical. I can see a few questions that were asked in terms of, how are buybacks decided, at what, why is there a separate, why is there a discount? And so they're very, very strong questions, Shweta, but long answers, unfortunately.
So that is the reason I didn't take it. I was like, hey, you know what? This is a great question to come back for a follow-up. Given we were doing this for the first time, we want to make sure we keep it a little more light and on the surface. But hopefully the next one we'll go. We have Ankita with us, I'm sure. We'll go a lot more deeper. But everyone on the call, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been super fun. Ankita, again, thank you so much. I'll actually leave it for a minute in case you want anything to share.
No, I think what I just wanted to say is thank you so much for having me here. I think it is such an important topic to discuss, and so thank you for bringing this conversation out into the open. I think ESOPs is a rabbit hole that that we can go down. We can keep talking about it, but it is such an important conversation to have. If this country is going to create the next generation, we keep talking about, I think India has the largest working population. We probably have the most qualified working people now, after, and we have the largest population of engineers, etc. If the next decade is to be India's decade, we are underestimating what power ESOP can play towards catalyzing the next sort of 10, 15, 20 years of our growth, right? So it's a super important conversation to have. Would love to be involved in all the conversations that you want to have. You want to do an offline session, we can do an intimate session, we can do more of these. My LinkedIn is open. Please ping me. Feel free. Happy to have chats and yeah, and be a part of the change.
Thank you so much, Ankita. I'm going to use your line very shamelessly in multiple forums that death and
Perfect.
taxes are inevitable.
Absolutely.
This is just going to stick too hard with me. But again, thank you so much for joining in. We'll probably call this a day. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks, folks. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us
Thanks.
today.
Cheers. Cheers. Bye. Bye.